I was 72 hours away from watching 5 years of work collapse when an envelope showed up in my school mailbox. Inside sat a cashier's check for $100,000, precisely the sum needed to rescue our music program. No signature, no note, nothing but an anonymous gift about to reshape dozens of children's lives. I needed to track down whoever had done this and thank them. I never could have guessed what kind of person had actually written that check. Or the reason behind it, one that would leave me breathless. Before we get into it, I'm curious, did your school have music class growing up? Drop your answer in the comments. And if stories about surprise generosity and the way community can heal people speak to you, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let me take you back to the day everything in my world started to crack. The email from Principal Davidson landed at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, and somehow I knew before I even opened it that my life was about to shift. The subject line read, "Budget meeting follow-up, urgent." After 5 years teaching music at Lincoln Elementary in suburban Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'd learned that all-caps urgency in an email subject line never signaled anything good. I was at my desk in the music room, tucked inside the organized clutter that made up my workspace, stacks of sheet music, bins overflowing with rhythm instruments, a donated upright piano slightly out of tune but still capable of something beautiful in the right hands. 23 third graders had just filed out after an enthusiastic, if not entirely polished performance of This Land Is Your Land, and the room still buzzed faintly with the energy of kids finding their voices. I opened the email. "Greta, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. The board has made decisions about the music and arts programs that we need to discuss. Please don't share this with students or parents until after our meeting. Principal Davidson." My hands turned ice cold. I'd read the budget reports. I'd sat through the community meetings where worried parents asked pointed questions about possible cuts. But I'd convinced myself our program was untouchable. We were good at what we did. Our spring concerts packed the auditorium. Our students consistently posted strong scores on state assessments. We mattered, or so I believed. I scanned the room, the recorders lined up neatly on their hooks, the posters mapping out families of instruments, the handmade banner reading "Music is Life" that my students had crafted the year before. Every inch of that room represented years of patient effort, grant applications, and my own money spent whenever the budget came up short. This couldn't actually be happening. That night sleep barely came. I kept rehearsing arguments in my head, building a defense for the program. Music wasn't some indulgence, it was essential. Research consistently showed kids in music education performed better academically, built stronger social skills, and developed sharper creativity and emotional intelligence. We weren't simply teaching kids to hold an instrument. We were teaching discipline, teamwork, and the joy of creating something beautiful alongside others. But I also understood how these budget decisions typically played out. When funds ran tight, programs like mine were always first on the chopping block. Reading and math counted as core subjects. Music got filed under expendable, a pleasant extra schools could survive without when finances demanded sacrifice. The next morning I showed up at Principal Davidson's office 15 minutes early. Margaret Davidson had led Lincoln for 8 years, and we'd always gotten along well professionally. She understood what arts education was worth and had championed my program before. But the second I saw her expression as she waved me toward a chair, I knew this time she'd lost the battle. "Greta, I'm so sorry," she began. And those 4 words told me everything before she even continued. "The board met last night and made the final decision. Due to state funding cuts and increased operational costs, we're eliminating the music program effective at the end of the school year." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Eliminate it? Completely? I fought for you, I promise." I presented all the data, all the research about music education's impact on academic performance. But the numbers are brutal. We're facing an $800,000 shortfall, and we can't cut teaching positions for core subjects or essential support staff. "How much would it cost to keep the program?" I asked, my voice holding steady despite the panic climbing up my throat. Margaret checked her notes. "Your salary, benefits, supplies, instrument maintenance, and the space allocation. Approximately $100,000 annually." $100,000. It might as well have been $1 million. "I have 8 weeks, I said. It wasn't really a question. "Until the end of March." "I'm so sorry, Greta. If there was any other way. I left her office in a fog, retracing my steps to the music room through hallways lined with student artwork, past bulletin boards still advertising our upcoming spring concert. How could I possibly tell my students this would be their final semester of music class? How would I explain to the 5th graders in the advanced ensemble that there'd be no middle school program waiting for them on the other side? My first class that day was 4th grade general music. 24 eager faces looked up as I walked in, ready to learn, with no idea their teacher was quietly falling apart. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," they said together. "Good morning, musicians," I answered, forcing warmth into my voice. "Today we're going to learn about dynamics, the volume of music and how it creates emotion." As I walked them through crescendos and diminuendos, through the way sound could carry feelings words couldn't reach, I made up my mind. This program wasn't going down without a fight. If the school board couldn't scrape together the funds, I'd find them myself. That afternoon I sat down with a notebook and started sketching out a plan. 8 weeks to raise $100,000. Sounded impossible, but I'd seen communities rally around causes before. Maybe, just maybe, if people understood what this program truly meant, they'd step up to save it. That evening I built a crowdfunding page, pouring everything I had into the description. Stories of students who'd found confidence through music, data on academic gains, testimonials from parents. I set the goal at $100,000 and hit publish with something close to a prayer. Then I got to work. I ran a bake sale. I organized a car wash. I contacted every local business, every community group, every church and civic organization I could think of. I stood outside grocery stores on weekends holding collection jars. I applied for every grant from every foundation with even a loose connection to arts funding. The response was decent but modest. People were sympathetic, sure. $20 here, $50 there. Local businesses chipped in what they could. But Ann Arbor wasn't cheap to live in, and most families were already stretched thin. After 3 grueling weeks, I'd raised $8,400. Nowhere close to enough. But money wasn't the only obstacle standing in my way. There was also Harold Brennan. Harold lived in a sprawling Victorian house directly across from Lincoln Elementary, and for 2 years running, he'd been the school's most relentless critic. Every single day without exception, he called the front office to complain about the unbearable noise drifting from our program. "The screeching starts at 9 in the morning and doesn't stop until 3, he'd tell whoever picked up, voice sharp with annoyance. "I'm an elderly man trying to enjoy my retirement in peace, and I'm subjected to this constant racket. It's harassment." I tried to accommodate him. I'd rearranged practice schedules, shifted the noisier classes to rooms farther from his house, even soundproofed what I could within our thin budget. Nothing satisfied him. He'd shown up at school board meetings, standing during public comment to deliver furious speeches about property values and quality of life, and had even threatened to sue the district over public nuisance. I couldn't ignore the irony that my program was being cut for costing too much while simultaneously being blamed for being too loud. Harold Brennan was about to get exactly what he'd been asking for, and he had no idea yet. "Why is that man so angry?" my student Emily asked one afternoon, after Harold had called yet again to complain about our 2nd grade recorder unit. "I don't know," I said, watching through the window as Harold stood on his porch, arms folded, glaring toward the school. "But I'm too busy trying to save this program to worry about one grumpy neighbor." 4 weeks into the fundraiser, I'd scraped together $12,000. Nowhere near the target, and the deadline was closing in fast. I started having dreams about the moment I'd have to break the news to my students, about boxing up my classroom, about what came next. Teaching music had been my whole adult life. It wasn't just a job, it was who I was, my purpose, my way of contributing something to the world. The thought of losing it felt like losing a piece of myself. On a cold Monday morning in late March, with only 3 days left before the school board's final deadline, I got to school before sunrise to set up for an early rehearsal with the 5th grade ensemble. The building sat dark and silent, my footsteps echoing down the empty hallways. I unlocked my classroom, flipped on the lights, and braced myself for another day of teaching, while carrying the weight of everything I stood to lose. Then I checked my mailbox in the main office, and nothing was ever the same again. An envelope sat inside. A plain white business envelope, but even before opening it, something about it felt weighty. The paper was thick, expensive. My name was written across the front in careful old-fashioned script. Ms. Greta Thompson, Music Department. Inside was a cashier's check made out to the Lincoln Elementary School music program. The amount read $100,000. I stared at it, sure I was imagining things. I studied it again, every detail. It was real. Dated the day before. And there wasn't a single clue about who had sent it. My hands began to shake. I glanced around the empty office as though the mystery donor might materialize out of nowhere. But there was only silence and the low hum of the heating system. Somebody had just rescued my program. Somebody had handed over enough to fund an entire year, buying us time to find something sustainable long-term. And they'd done it anonymously, wanting nothing back. I ran through the list of everyone who donated to the fundraiser, wondering who among them had this kind of money, and why they wouldn't want any credit for something this remarkable. When Principal Davidson arrived an hour later, I was already sitting in her office with the check in hand. "Margaret, you need to see this." She examined the check, looked at me, looked back at the check. "Is this real?" "I think so. It was in my mailbox this morning." "Who sent it?" "I don't know. There's no name, no note, nothing." Margaret picked up the phone and called the bank printed on the check. After a short exchange confirming the check was genuine and would clear, she hung up and looked at me, stunned. "Greta, someone just saved your program. Someone in this community cared enough to make this happen." "I know," I said. "And I have to find them. I have to say thank you." The first thing I did was study the envelope more closely. The handwriting was distinctive, old-fashioned cursive full of elegant loops and deliberate spacing. The kind someone learns when penmanship still mattered, likely someone older. There was no return address and no postmark, meaning it had been delivered by hand. I checked with our school secretary, Mrs. Cameron, who'd unlocked the building that morning. "I got here at 6:30, she said. "But I didn't see anyone near your mailbox. Maybe they came when I was in the restroom." I requested the school's security footage. Lincoln Elementary had cameras covering all the main entrances, and I spent my lunch period combing through the early morning recordings with the assistant principal, Mr. Walsh. "There," I said, pointing at the timestamp. 6:47 a.m. Someone's walking up to the main entrance. The figure was wrapped in a heavy coat and hat, impossible to identify. They stepped up to the door, opened it, walked over to the mailboxes, slid the envelope into mine, and slipped away, keeping to the shadows where the camera's resolution was weakest. "Can't make out who it is," Mr. Walsh said. "But whoever they are, they knew how to avoid the cameras." Over the following days, I became fixated on uncovering my anonymous benefactor. I compiled a list of every fundraiser donor, hunting for anyone who might have the resources to give something this large. I cross-checked names against anyone who'd shown unusual interest in the program. I even visited the bank that had issued the check, only to be told, politely, that customer information couldn't be shared without a court order. "I just want to thank them," I pleaded with the manager. "I understand, Ms. Thompson, but our client's privacy is paramount." I hit a wall. And then something curious happened. Harold Brennan stopped calling to complain. For 2 straight years he'd been a constant: phone calls, letters, appearances at public meetings. But the very morning I discovered the envelope, the complaints simply stopped. He was still visible in his house across the street, still occasionally parked on his porch watching the school. But the furious phone calls had vanished entirely. It struck me as an odd coincidence. One Thursday afternoon, I left school late after a long rehearsal with the ensemble, and noticed something. Harold was out on his porch, watching students filter out of the building with an expression I'd never seen cross his face before. Not anger, not irritation. Something closer to longing. On impulse, I crossed the street and walked up his driveway. He spotted me and immediately retreated inside, but not before I caught sight of something resting on the small table beside his rocking chair. A distinctive fountain pen with an ornate silver cap, matching the style that might have produced the careful, old-fashioned cursive on my envelope. My pulse quickened. Could it really be? I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. "Mr. Brennan, I know you're in there. I just want to talk to you for a minute." Still nothing, though I could make out movement through the frosted glass in the door. "Please, I'm not here to argue about the music program. I need to ask you something." The door finally cracked open. Harold Brennan looked older than I'd realized, probably late 70s, deep creases lining his face, eyes carrying what looked like decades of sorrow. "What do you want?" he asked, his usual sharp edge gone. "That fountain pen on your porch, is that the pen you use for important correspondence?" Something shifted across his face, fear, guilt, maybe both. "Why are you asking about my pen?" "Because I received an envelope 3 days ago with handwriting that looks exactly like it might have come from a pen like that, and I noticed that your complaints about the music program stopped the same day that envelope appeared." His jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Brennan, did you donate $100,000 to save our music program?" He went silent for a long moment. Then, to my shock, his eyes welled with tears. "You should go," he said, voice cracking. "Please just go. Not until you tell me the truth. If you saved our program, I need to know why. For 2 years you've done everything possible to shut us down. You've complained. You've threatened legal action. You've told everyone who would listen that we're a nuisance. And then you anonymously donate the exact amount needed to keep us running. It's complicated," he whispered. "Then uncomplicate it for me. Please. I've been searching for my donor for days, trying to understand. Who would make such an incredible gift? If it was you, I need to know why." Harold stood in his doorway, an old man clearly wrestling with something heavy. Finally he stepped back and pulled the door open wider. "You'd better come in." Stepping into Harold Brennan's home felt like walking into a time capsule. The furniture was aged but carefully maintained, solid, well-built pieces meant to outlast their owners. Photographs crowded every surface, an entire life laid out across frames of every size and style. But what struck me hardest was the music, not playing. The house sat completely silent, but its evidence was everywhere. A violin case rested on a shelf, sheet music was stacked on a side table, and above the fireplace on the mantel sat a photograph that stopped my breath cold. It showed a woman, blonde, likely in her 50s, kind-eyed with a warm smile, standing in front of a classroom full of children. She held a recorder and wore a shirt that read "Music is Life." "Who is that?" I asked, though understanding was already dawning. Harold walked to the photograph and lifted it, holding it with a gentleness that spoke of habit, of having touched that frame 1,000 times before. "That's Mary, my wife. She taught music at Lincoln Elementary for 32 years. The pieces snapped together. "Mary Brennan, she retired about 5 years ago, right before I was hired." "She didn't retire," Harold said quietly. "She got sick. She wanted to keep teaching, fought to stay in the classroom as long as she could. But eventually the treatments made it impossible. She passed away 3 years ago this April." Tears rose in my own eyes. "I'm so sorry. The music program was her life," Harold continued, still cradling the photograph. "She would come home every day with stories about her students, about the little breakthroughs and victories. A shy child finding their voice through singing. A troubled kid learning discipline through learning an instrument. She believed that music could save people, could heal wounds that nothing else could touch." He set the photograph carefully back on the mantel. "After she died, I couldn't bear hearing the music from the school. Every note was a reminder of what I'd lost. Every time I heard children singing, I heard her voice teaching them, encouraging them. The joy in that building felt like an insult to my grief. So I complained. I called and I wrote letters and I tried to make it stop because stopping the music felt like the only way to stop the pain." "But you donated to save the program," I said softly. Harold moved toward the window overlooking the school. "I was having breakfast when I saw your crowdfunding page shared on the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had posted about how the music program was being cut, about how you were trying to raise money to save it. And I thought, good, finally the noise will stop. Finally, I'll have peace." He turned back toward me, tears running down his weathered face. "But then I kept reading. I read the stories you posted about students whose lives had been changed by music. I saw the photographs of children holding instruments, their faces lit up with pride and joy. And I realized those were the same stories Mary used to tell me. The same joy she'd spent her entire career creating. I spent 2 days arguing with myself. Part of me wanted the music to stop because hearing it hurt too much. But the bigger part, the part that loved Mary and honored her memory, knew that shutting down that program would be destroying everything she'd worked for. It would be like erasing her legacy, silencing the joy she brought to thousands of children over 32 years. So you made the donation. I made the donation. Mary and I never had children of our own. We'd saved carefully, lived modestly. When she died, she left me with more money than I'd ever need for the rest of my life. And I realized that money should go toward continuing her work, toward keeping music alive in that building she loved so much. But why anonymously? Why not let people know? The program could be named after her. We could honor her memory. Because I'm ashamed. For 2 years I've been the angry old man complaining about the music program, trying to shut down the very thing my wife dedicated her life to building. I've been cruel and petty and selfish. I don't deserve recognition. I just wanted to make sure Mary's legacy lived on. Even if no one knows it was me who made it possible. I crossed the room to where he stood and, after a moment's hesitation, took his hand. Mr. Brennan, Harold, thank you. Thank you for saving our program. Thank you for honoring Mary's memory. And thank you for sharing her story with me. He squeezed my hand, crying openly now. Will you tell them? Tell the students about her? Tell them that their music program survived because once upon a time, there was a teacher who believed music could change the world, one child at a time. I'll do better than that, I said. If you'll let me, I'd like to dedicate our spring concert to Mary. I want the students to know whose legacy they're carrying forward. Harold's face crumpled with emotion. She would have loved that. 3 weeks later, the Lincoln Elementary auditorium was packed for our spring concert. The program notes carried a special dedication. This concert is dedicated to Mary Brennan, who taught music at Lincoln Elementary for 32 years and touched countless lives with her passion, dedication, and unwavering belief that every child deserves the gift of music. Thanks to an anonymous donation made in her honor, the Lincoln Elementary music program will continue bringing joy, learning, and artistic expression to our students for years to come. Harold sat in the front row, in a seat I'd personally set aside for him. As the concert opened, I watched his face while 200 children, from squeaky third-grade recorders to the polished fifth-grade ensemble, filled the auditorium with sound. He cried through nearly all of it, but they were no longer tears of grief. They were tears of joy, of pride, of connection to something larger than his own pain. After the concert, something remarkable unfolded. Students lined up to shake Harold's hand, unaware of who he was but sensing he mattered somehow. Parents thanked him for coming. And slowly, hesitantly, Harold began to smile, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen cross his face. Mr. Brennan, I said as the crowd thinned out, would you like to see Mary's old classroom? I've been using it, but I'd love to show you how we've kept some of her teaching materials, her organization system. His eyes brightened. I'd like that very much. Walking through the quiet school, Harold told me stories about Mary, her terrible jokes that somehow always landed with students, her patience with kids who struggled, her belief that no child existed who couldn't learn to love music. She used to say that music was the universal language, that it could cross any barrier, heal any wound, connect any two people. I didn't really understand what she meant until I lost her. Only then did I realize that music wasn't just sound, it was a way of remembering, of connecting to joy even in the midst of grief. We reached the music room and I unlocked the door. Harold stepped in and went very still, taking in the instruments, the posters, the organized chaos that defined the space. It looks almost exactly the same, like she just stepped out for a moment. Her spirit is still here, I said. In every child who discovers they can sing, in every struggling student who finds confidence through learning an instrument. You kept that alive, Harold. You honored her in the most meaningful way possible. 6 months on, Harold had become a fixture at Lincoln Elementary. He volunteered as a concert usher and helped students practice their instruments after school. The angry, complaining neighbor had turned into the program's most devoted champion. And in the process he'd found a way to stay tethered to his late wife's memory that brought him joy instead of pain. On the anniversary of Mary's death, we held a small ceremony to unveil a plaque in the music room. The Mary Brennan Music Room, where every child finds their voice. Harold stood beside me as we pulled back the covering, and I watched him silently mouth words I recognized as something Mary must have said often. Music is life. She was right, I told him. Music is life. It's memory. It's healing. It's connection. And thanks to you, Her gift will keep giving to children for generations. Harold squeezed my shoulder. No, Miss Thompson. Thanks to you. You fought for this program when it would have been easier to give up. You showed me that Mary's work was worth preserving. You reminded me that grief doesn't have to mean shutting down joy. It can mean finding new ways to celebrate the people we love. Watching him interact with students after the ceremony, smiling, encouraging, sharing bits of Mary's wisdom, my mind drifted back to that mysterious envelope that had appeared in my mailbox months before. An anonymous gift from the last person I'd have suspected had saved our program, but it had accomplished something else too. It had shown me that the people who seem most hostile are often just people in pain, that the loudest complaints sometimes come from the deepest grief, and that when we look past the surface we usually find stories about love, loss, and the very human need to hold on to what matters most. Harold Brennan had saved our music program, but in the process he'd also saved himself, finding his way back to joy, back to connection, back to the legacy of the woman he loved. And every time I hear children making music in that room now, I think of Mary, who believed so deeply in music's power to change lives. She'd been right all along. Music had changed her husband's life too, giving him a reason to keep going, a way to honor her memory, and a community that welcomed him back from his isolation. That's the real magic of music, not just the notes and the rhythm, but the way it links us to one another, and to the people we've loved and lost. It's a language that speaks straight to the heart, cutting past words entirely, reaching the places where we're most human. Mary Brennan understood that. And now, because of Harold's gift, thousands of children will keep discovering it for themselves. What an incredibly moving story about grief, redemption, and the power of honoring the people we love through action instead of words. Harold's journey from angry neighbor to devoted supporter is a reminder that behind every difficult person, there's often an untold story of pain. What did you think of how Harold handled his grief and turned pain into tribute? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story about unexpected kindness, community healing, and the lasting impact of devoted teachers moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more uplifting stories every day. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss our next heartwarming tale.